Hello and welcome to the AIDEM Interactions. The AIDEM Interactions is holding a special discussion on the situation in Manipur. It's a very important day in Manipur is concerned. There have been problems there for close to 80 days. And for the last 3 days, there have been a series of developments which are very disconcerting, which have really shaken up the conscience of the nation as well as the whole world. The revelation of a video where two cookies or women were paraded naked by a crowd of nearly 1,000 people and molested and perhaps allegedly brutally gang raped. That has created reverberations across the country. And finally, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has kept a silence on this issue, a studied silence on this issue all these days, has finally been forced to talk about it. And he has condemned the incident and he has promised the world that, that the culprits will not go unpunished. At the same time, the Supreme Court of India has also taken note of it, the situation in Manipur, and has told the government that if situation continues like this, it will have to take action and get into some kind of a corrective measure. So it's a very important day in the contemporary history of India, especially in relation to Manipur. And to discuss this, we have a panel of two young women who have been closely following the situation in Manipur. Kim, who is a student, PhD student at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. And she's also a part of a network of women from the region, from the Manipur and the Northeast region, who have been trying to coordinate relief work at the ground level. Kim, welcome to the AIDEM Interactions. And then we have Thulasi K Raj, a young lawyer practicing in the Supreme Court of India, somebody who's very closely following social and political issues and reacting on it from time to time. So I think we'll start with Kim, because, you have been very actively involved in the ground level relief work, in the sense, coordinating it from various parts of the country. So how do you look at the developments over the last 2 days, and especially the Prime Minister's reaction and the Supreme Court's intervention?
So I would like to point out that a video that has surfaced is of an incident that happened the very second day that the violence began. So this is a video that of an incident that has happened on May 4th. And it is not something that we in the Kukizo community are not aware about, or even other members of Manipur are not aware about. An FIR had already been filed long ago. We have been, when we are protesting and when we are doing our sit-ins, we keep mentioning that this is something that has happened, but it is sad that such a gruesome video had to surface for the entire country to accept what we have been saying and chanting and pleading for intervention for the more than 2 months now. So yes, and so that is what I would like to point out first of all, that this is it's just something that the entire state, especially women of the state, have been pleading with. So yeah, first of all, that it had to become quote unquote sensationalized for everyone to notice and to acknowledge that an intervention has to take place. So that is what I would like to first of all point out. With regards to other things that has been happening on the ground, it is not the only case of sexual violence nature that has happened. And we are also very mindful of protecting the identity of so many women, which is also why we keep talking about it in a more general matter, that acts of sexual violence. We have filed our FIRs, we have taken up the matter with the courts here. So we have the authorities, the concerned authorities are aware of all these acts. But it's just that we never wanted to sensationalize it, to protect these women. As a woman, you do not want the worst day of your life to be on constant repeat. You don't, but sadly, that is that how society is working. That is what it has taken for others to take note. Because again, as time and time again, the weaponization of a woman's body, only when a woman's body is defiled, in such heinous nature, does the common man take note that something is happening. And I would also like to point out, even though it's not directly related, but before this, there was a gruesome beheading that had also taken place of a tribal youth. And it was of such drastic, disgusting nature. The man in the video who was spotted with the beheaded fight by those in social media, they found his social media, they identified him, and yet no action has taken place till today. But it is the whole sexualization, the woman's body that I'm not able to put into words. But
in fact, the Chief Minister N. Biren Singh himself is on record today saying that there have been several instances like this. How do you account for a statement like that from the head of the state?
Yeah, so that is pure acknowledgement that the head of the state himself is aware that there are so many incidents that has taken place and all of this, the certain community and certain members are still trying to justify that such an act took place in the beginning, in the heat of the violence, because of a rumor that a similar incident took place from the other side. And it's like they see it as an eye for an eye. So that they're still trying to justify it in that case. But however, the initial spark, the initial false rumor that led to such a widespread ethnic clash, it has been proven false. There has been no evidence of that case. But regardless of that, that is still being used to justify what has taken place and the video that has surfaced. And perhaps I wouldn't want to diverge, but perhaps the head of the state is also trying to indicate that, that such natures has happened from both sides. Is maybe what he's trying to indirectly indicate that. I do not want to.
We come to some other larger issues involved in this, especially in relation to the state and also the kind of, as you said, the important issue of how a woman's body is becoming a battleground, kind of a polarized battleground. But Thulasi, I mean, you are somebody who practices in the Supreme Court, who is adept with the law, the legal system. There are evidently a lot of legal implications and also social implications to this. So, what would you think are the legal implications of the revelation of this kind, especially in terms of, like, for example, now the Chief Minister himself has said that that these people should be beheaded and they should be kind of hanged to death. There are other issues which have come up. That people who have said that there should be publicly the perpetrators of the violence should be publicly punished and all that. But anyway, beyond this rhetoric, what exactly are the legal implications of a case of a revelation like this?
Of course, both legal and political implications remain. And first of all, I want to point out that the sort of causal reason for the entire conflict is traced to a judgment of the High Court itself, wherein the High Court considered whether scheduled tribe status, that is ST status, could be given to one of the communities who are involved in the conflict. And from reports, what I notice is that the precipitating factor, partly for the conflict, was that there was a direction to the government to consider inclusion of the community among the list of scheduled tribes, which has been a demand of the community for long. And that escalated into a law and order situation as we see today, and that led to racial tensions, that led to various kinds of conflict, including a massive displacement. But I would think that even now, even though, as you rightly said, the Supreme Court has stated that it will be constrained to take cognizance of the issue, I identify the issue as ultimately a law and order problem, which, the legislature and the executive must take care of, and is ultimately up to their disposal, being the kinds of centers who are well equipped and who are at least theoretically experts to deal with a law and order conflict or of potential violence of this kind. The only failure in this case, as we see, is that the violence has been escalating since almost 70 days now. It began, I believe, the earliest incident happened in the end of April or the beginning of May. And we see that there has been no sensitivity or no accountability in terms of how to deal with the crisis. So, we know that generally there has been an absence of attention when it comes to the issues of the Northeast. The mainstream political parties or the mainstream media, for that matter, have been to a great extent been sidelining various issues coming from the Northeast and have been ignoring various issues that are the center of Northeastern politics. So what I see is a failure of a state machinery to a great extent of being able to deal with or just being able to control the law and order situation in the state, which led to this escalation. Otherwise, I think a sensitive and a sensible state machinery would not have allowed a situation like this to escalate to this nature. And of course, in terms of the legal implications, I think what politics can do in this instance is much more than what the law can do. Of course, the law is in place for implementing certain orders, to impose restrictions on certain kind of rights which might not be available during this period when the state is threatened with a law and order breakdown of this nature. But of course, the principal actors or the principal agents to act would be the executive and the legislature, who have to, at least at this delayed point of time, deal with the issue with the sensitivity that it requires. And it also remains to be said that blank statements of bringing the perpetrators to justice, etc. I'm just a bit skeptical as to how much
it can be achieved
result will be actually achieved. Since there are a lot of things which needs to be paid attention while we deal with an issue like this. There needs to be attention with respect to the sensitivity of the case. There has to be someone who knows the history of the politics in Northeast, who is aware of the geopolitics, and who is also sensitive to deal with the current crisis, the racial tensions that is happening. Only when we compile all of these ingredients together can there be a solution, can there be a constructive solution to the current problem. And that, I think, is seriously absent in terms of what the states are looking to achieve. And that is, in fact, what worries me to a great extent.
That's exactly what Kim was also saying, that that a video like this had to surface, and the sensationalization that took place along with that had to spread across the country for people to acknowledge it. But Kim, I have a question. See, now, of course, the Prime Minister has responded, though he has spent about 80 seconds or something on this as compared to the 1,800 hours of silence that he has maintained on this issue. But then what is the immediate reaction from people on the ground, from people like your compatriots in the ground, people who have been interacting with, whom we have been trying to provide relief to? How do they look at this response from the Prime Minister and the Supreme Court?
I think when you're in over 70 days of no actual action and no actual intervention taking place, even though it's just an 80-second video, like, first of all, we're like, finally, it may have been just a short mention, but finally, there is a mention. We now have proof that they are, in fact, aware of it. And other than that, even it does pain us as members of the Cookies community. It does pain all of us that this is what this video had to surface for this to happen, because this incident may have been something that happened more than 2 months ago, but we can empathize, we can feel the pain that those women in that video felt. Like, I haven't had the heart to see that video, but just the screenshots and just the written accounts were traumatic enough. So, and this is something that we were aware of even before, but the fact that it has come out, and the fact that the video was taken and circulated for a very different purpose, right? Because it was obviously it was recorded by the perpetrators, by one of the perpetrators. So that itself, that fact itself, it leaves shudders. So yes, but then the people are happy, are not, I won't say happy, but are relieved that finally it is the people are taking note. Even in the last few days, there were international bodies or international agents, let's say, who had mentioned about what is happening in Manipur, or taken note of it, and had offered to the state that if need be, we can step in. Perhaps you're not able to contain the situation, and in the obviously the whole talk about the fact that it is India's problem, and that is a very outlook to try to step in and solve our came up. But even that international mention, even though it is just a mention in passing, even that alone gives a lot of hope to the people who have been fighting for their voices to be heard for so long, and so many cases keep taking place, and whole plastered show that things are going back to normal. Even till now, so there are still agents that are saying that this is an old video from when the violence was at its peak, and today Manipur is going back to normal. This is just an old video that is resurfacing. There are many who are thinking that.
What is your take on that? What is your take on that? I mean, the kind of argument that it's just an old video and Manipur is going back. Is Manipur actually going back to normal?
Not at all. I don't think Manipur can ever go back to normal. And when we say normal, I am defining normal as the pre-May 3rd days, when things are so bad that even your closest friends, just because they belong to a different community, you cannot fully trust them, and even you cannot. The mistrust has gone down too deep now. And because no intervention has taken place, it may be if an intervention had taken immediately right after the giant uproar, then maybe we would be in the rebuilding phase. More than 2 months, the divisiveness has been allowed to spread. The divide is so deep, and the mistrust is so deep that I do not know when can we even start thinking of rebuilding. And we can only start rebuilding. You can only start talking about peace only when justice is seen.
Justice also has to be kind of has to be seen to be kind of enforced. That is important. Thulasi, there is a larger issue that's being discussed in the context of this climate of mistrust that Kim was referring to. That this is there is a stream of opinion that this has been a very active, calculated, orchestrated polarization exercise, something which is something creating Manipur into a kind of laboratory like Gujarat. I mean, what happened in Gujarat in the early 2000s, 2002 to be precise. So, do you see any parallels on this? Because do you think that is why the violence is not stopping?
I mean, I'm not one to speculate, but I would think that worry is legitimate. The worry is legitimate in view of the kind of policies that the majority government at the center has been unleashing since they were elected to power in 2014. So we have both the NDA 1 and the NDA 2 regime, in which various policies and various laws were enacted. There was a systematic targeting of certain communities, especially the minority communities, including Muslims and Christians. And there has been a systematic framing of laws and enactment and coming into force of policies which were targeted against these communities in particular. Therefore, this is the political context, the broader political background in which we are talking about. And this is particularly why the situation in Manipur, as opposed to being under any other government, I think being under the radar of the current ruling party in the central government, it is particularly worrisome because of this reason, that you already have this larger background in which minority communities are not treated with fairness, that they are not accorded the rights that are guaranteed to them under the constitution, that are guaranteed to them under the system of politics that we have, and this kind of history that we have been having since our independence long ago. So we see that is and in that context, when we see a racial tension of communal flavor, that becomes particularly dangerous. And that is the danger, I think, which people have been flagging. And that adds sort of this communal element to the tension, adds one more layer to it. And that is partly why, as you rightly pointed out, the concern becomes whether this will become a laboratory to experiment with the kind of violence that we are seeing today and what this will lead to.
The kind of an ideological experiment or a kind of an ideological political laboratory. I mean,
Exactly. And we've been seeing it with various laws. So what is interesting is that the BJP, generally speaking, has not been subtle or has not been indirect about what the policy is with respect to minority religions, generally speaking. We have seen it with the Citizenship Amendment Act, for example. We've seen it with the Triple Talaq ordinance and later the legislation. So we have seen that there is no hesitation in putting on record that this is the official policy of the government. This is what the government will pursue. And this is what has become a paradigm political agenda of the BJP. And this is why it becomes very precarious as to the apathy of the central government when it comes to the issues in Manipur becomes very, very problematic. And that this added communal angle, of course, is very worrying, I would think.
Kim, the other issue that one keeps hearing and keeps reading from in relation to Manipur is that it is now becoming an interstate issue. Two more states are getting drawn into this whole conflict, this whole situation. There's been this case of this tribal boy with Naga origins who was kind of attacked, and then the Nagaland government responded to it and kind of came up with it. And of course, there will be a huge inflow of refugees from the community, the tribal communities, to Mizoram, and the Mizoram government has given protection to some of these people, and Mizoram government is also very actively taking up this case. So basically, this is becoming a interstate problem also. Do you have anything to say on that?
The case where the Nagaland had to comment on was on this Naga lady who was killed because she did not have identification on herself. So they misidentified her to belong to one of the Kukizo communities. The pressure from the Nagaland government. And there was also a lot of fear that that right now it's very bipolar. There's the Métis communities versus the Kuki-Zo communities. There was so much fear that if the Naga tribe gets involved, then there will be way more pressure from Nagaland. So an immediate reaction was given from the state regarding the killing of that Naga lady. And which is very interesting to note, because I think just barely a week before that Naga lady was killed, another Kuki-Zo lady who had mental health issues was also killed in Imphal. Because so she refused, since she had mental health issues and all, she refused to leave when the rest of her community left Imphal. She said, "No, I'll stay back." And she, due to her health issues, she goes about her everyday routine and all. And she was identified and she was shot dead in broad daylight. And there were a lot of witnesses also to that. However, no statement or nothing has happened regarding that lady. And just a week or a few days later, the Naga lady gets killed, and immediate reaction and immediate reaction as well as action takes. That Nagaland state government has a stake in it.
What about Mizoram's, the way Mizoram is kind of protecting the refugees? I mean, so how is that kind of developing?
Yes, the Mizoram government has continued, is still continuing to give support, and is still accommodating so many of those who have been internally displaced out of Manipur and into their state. However, we must take note that the hill districts where the Kuki-Zo communities reside in is divided by the valley. So there is only one side that shares a border with Mizoram. So only that side has managed to escape to Mizoram. The other side is closer to the Nagaland border. So Mizoram government has continued to show its support, and has even in terms of education, has instructed its government schools and colleges to allow those displaced students to give them admission even in the middle of the academic year, and has taken note that they may not have their documents, but this is of immediate need. Yes, this may be because of the similarity in the cultural and ethnicity that the people of Mizoram share with the Kuki-Zo communities. Hence, a helping hand has been raised. However, there is a strain on Mizoram government, since it is taking in one of the biggest load of those who have been internally displaced. So they will continue to face a lot of pressure economically and financially to assist so many displaced. However, they are continuing to show support. There are a lot of other states in the region, northeastern region, where many who have been displaced have also moved to. However, in those states, there is a bit of fear.
Would you like to name those states? Would you like to talk about the?
So many have also moved to parts of Assam, Meghalaya, and so on. And the government is, of course, being as helpful as they can be. However, there is already a strain of migration issues in states like Assam and Meghalaya from the bordering countries. So they may face more difficulties in those states than they would in a state like Mizoram.
Thulasi, how do you look at this situation, the interstate issue? There is also already a fear of the migrant in places like Assam. It's not just fear; it is kind of it's rabid kind of animosity against the migrant. So, how do you look at the situation? What kind of complications are we going to face?
Yes, the most prominent complication in terms of interstate migration is going to be the lack of sort of concerted effort of all the governments together. So when we have a massive displacement of the current nature, we need the state governments to work together, and we also need to prevent the potential human rights abuses that are already taking place in the state. So we know that what is just surfaced, for example, is just one video, and we do not know how many more exist. And we also are aware of the fact that partly why the mainstream was kept outside the purview of knowledge is because of the suspension of internet services in Manipur. So now the question comes as to whether the suspension of internet is actually for preventing any kind of violence, or was it done for the purpose of keeping away the mainstream media and the mainstream politics from what is the actual situation transpiring in the state. That is also, I think, a legitimate concern to be addressed. Now, in terms of the new problems that are arising in terms of the migration and displacement of families, and it is also told that there are families are in addition to being displaced, they're also tearing apart of families when there is violence. So the children are often separated from parents and so on and so forth, which Kim was mentioning in terms of the potential educational opportunities that they could have had. But I would think that, law and order is a situation when it escalates beyond the borders of the state, unless and until you have the central government acting very vigilantly, acting very genuinely and sincerely in an issue like this, and unless the state governments come together to ensure that the abuses are no longer continuing, or we have some kind of protective or preventive mechanism against the human rights abuses, whether in terms of just active violence or in terms of other kinds of violence, such as sexual violence, in particular against women, and the abuse, in particular in terms of children and the kinds of difficulties that they are undergoing, and just deprivation of a lot of aspects, including safety, including health, including education, and so on and so forth. So we can only address, this is now escalated into an issue such that we can no longer turn our eyes blind towards it. So it's at least perhaps that is the
starting point.
That is the point, and that is the departing point, and that's probably the way forward, that the government needs to take this seriously, and not only when something of the sensationalizing nature gets leaked or gets out in social media, but right at the point where the violence erupts or the violence begins. Because we're talking about human beings, and we're talking about every small thing that is lost is something too important, to be just sidestepped or just to be overlooked. We're talking about crucial rights. We're talking about rights that we have fought over for generations. We're talking about protecting those rights. And I think it is better to ensure that there are preventive mechanisms in place, at least at this delayed point of time, so that things don't escalate further than this.
But then, as Kim was saying earlier, that the response from the ground is, of course, is of relief that that the Prime Minister has spoken, the Supreme Court has intervened. But they are still not very sure what are the concrete measures that would come up in days to come. Of course, what you are talking about and what Kim is also talking about is you're sketching a picture of hope, and you are trying to find out what can be done to make this picture of hope more concrete and realistic. But Kim, any final words on what is possible on the ground, what is possible by the governments in the days to come? Final words to you.
I think there is so much work to be done. The call for separate administration is there, and which has its legitimacy. Because we do not even.
But I have come to know that the Hill administration is now being done directly from Delhi. That the Biren Singh government has no role in it.
So to speak, yes, because according to the last instruction that was given to the Chief Minister when he came to Delhi to meet the Home Minister, he said, "You deal with the Valley and I'll deal with the Hill districts." But yes, so there is no light on what kind of separate administration is even going to happen, and there is also so many. When we talk about even the FIRs that has been filed by the displaced persons of the Kikuizo community members, of the loss of life, loss of housing, loss of everything, they have filed a 0 FIR, which is not with. You need another assistance, right? So they need because most of us are displaced out of Manipur, so we can't go to the jurisdiction, to the police station of our jurisdiction and file an FIR. So even just filing an FIR is such a tedious task, and to have all the displaced persons take note and file that FIR, so many are still scared. They're even too scared to even file a 0 FIR. I think that the task of even just the police machinery, the law and order machinery, to just take note of all that FIR alone will be a heavy task. But we do not know yet, what is the right monetary compensation is not justice at this point, which has been clearly pointed out again and again. The monetary compensation that keeps getting quoted by the authorities time and time again for different cases, but all under the same purview of the and the people keep saying that monetary compensation is nothing. When they give the thing, I feel that authorities keep forgetting that, especially for members of a tribal community, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a person from their family. Some of them, they have not lost just a family member, that they have lost their future hopes and dreams. That person could, perhaps their only sole earning member. That person was perhaps the only person in their family who managed to have higher education and so forth. When we talk about just one of the women in the video, one of them, just before she was paraded naked, her father and her brother were lynched by the mob just moments before she was paraded naked. Now, that woman, no matter how much monetary compensation you promise her, no matter even if you rebuild her house, because her entire village was also burned down, that is not justice. It's all I want to say. That unless a proper understanding is done of what the loss to the entire community means, that the loss is not seen in just economic terms. Until that is done, then I don't think that a talk of rebuilding is a possibility.
Thulasi, how do we look at law just not as law? And as Kim was saying, that how do we look at law as something to rebuild the society?
It is difficult. Because I would think very often law is seen as ultimately a system of regulation, a system of deterrence when you're talking about criminal law. It is very difficult for law, and that is fair enough, to resolve social crisis. And this is what we see is a conflict that has multiple dimensions in racial tensions. It has its elements in terms of communal. It has communal elements. It has its own particular history of conflict that you need to appreciate to understand the conflict in its entirety. And of course, although the laws have been existing and there have been various changes with respect to the rights of these communities since the 1950s, I would think that having sort of absolute ban by using the law, such as we've seen in the internet shutdown, has not only led to anything good in my limited view, but has in fact done more damage than good. So there is a problem of over-regulating as well, which I think is particularly shameful. What is in terms of what has happened in the violence, and because of the over-regulation, especially in terms of the internet shutdowns, is partly why the perpetrators have been able to remain unaccountable. Right? That remains to be said. That why an FIR is not registered, even though why no arrests have been made and no perpetrators have been arrested, even after an FIR was registered way back in May, shows the kind of absolute breakdown of the police machinery that we have here. And only when something gets sensationalized, only then the implementation of the law takes place, shows to some extent that it is not really a problem with the law as such, but it is a problem of implementation, which is purely a matter for the legislature and for the executive to take note of. So that is why even for motor cognizance, for example, the Supreme Court and the High Court to that extent have their own limitations. And because it's something that's happening at the ground, and you need concerted effort of the government, of both the central and the state level. You need concerted effort of various state governments which should operate in conformity and in consensus with each other, rather than having this sort of an eye for an eye attitude. And that sensitivity needs to be spread. For that, some reconciliatory effort, some mediation efforts, some conciliation efforts have to be launched from some corner, which I see absent now.
In other words, what both of you have been kind of looking at the whole issue from diverse perspectives. What you have been kind of emphasizing is the absolute absence of political will to address this issue, and one does not know whether this political will is absent either by design or by chance. One doesn't know whether it is absent by chance or is it absent by design. Certainly, as Kim stated in the beginning, the fact that the higher powers of this country, including the Prime Minister and Supreme Court, have taken note of the situation in Manipur, and of course that after a sensational video came out, that provides some relief, but whether it actually brings real hope about reconstruction, rebuilding of trust between different communities, that is indeed a question which does not have emphatically positive answers at this point of time. But I'm sure that all of us, including the AIDEM interactions, will have to keep coming back to Manipur, at least for a few months down the line. So we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you very much for giving us the time and the knowledge that you have. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Thulasi.